In the U.S., hundreds of flights were canceled on September 19th, 100,000 travelers stranded, all because an errant construction crew accidentally severed two cables. Could this be true? And some background on why it took hours that nobody's reporting. Also, Europe air travel is under attack from some ransomware criminals. Let's find out what's really going on in this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and air travel across the globe is being disrupted. First, let's find out what exactly happened in the U.S. on Friday, September 19th, what the news isn't reporting about the ground stop, and then we'll go into what's happening in Europe at some pretty big airports. On Friday, I got a call from my crew who were traveling back home to Dallas from a film shoot we were doing in the Carolinas. They said the gate agents were telling them that the flight was delayed for weather. It was already hitting on the pilot social media channels that a ground stop had been issued at DFW Airport for technical reasons, not weather. And that's a huge deal to have a ground stop for technical reasons. I told them to get ready for some travel adventures. It was about to get spicy, and it did. Their flight, of course, got canceled, and they were stuck in South Carolina. And they were just two of the 100,000 people that were traveling and also had a spicy adventure. I had relatives trying to get home from an Orlando vacation on Friday, and they didn't make it either. So what really happened? Was it weather? No, as you undoubtedly heard, air traffic control lost radar and communications in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And as I spent the weekend with my family, the number one question they asked was, no, really, there was no backup? And followed closely by, could a single backhoe take out the entire system? Were there no backups? Well, these are fair questions. Let's dive in. It was national headlines when Newark's air traffic control lost radar and communications for just 90 seconds, and this one was hours. And for those non-pilots, let me quickly describe how air traffic control, ATC, operates in a busy airspace like this. First, you have the tower. It controls the airspace directly around the airport. And then for busy airspace like this, you have approach control, or more precisely, terminal radar approach control, or TRACON. In the case of Dallas-Fort Worth, they control the airspace in roughly a 30-mile radius out from DFW Airport. They sequence all the commercial air traffic coming in and out of DFW, Love Field, and the outlying Metroplex airports. Tower hands off the departing planes to TRACON, and TRACON hands inbound planes to the towers. Outside of that, you have the third facility that controls airspace called Center. And once air traffic departs the boundary of approaches control, they will hand off the traffic to Center. And I've been able to tour both TRACON and Center. For DFW, TRACON is located in a windowless building right in the middle of the DFW airport. Fort Worth Center is in a building a couple of miles outside of the airport, but nearby. There are contingency plans for TRACON when they have a problem like this. First contingency is to send a couple of controllers up into the old middle tower at DFW. It's right there at the TRACON building. From there, they could handle a reduced load, at least get things moving again. Worst case, a one in and one out situation. And that old center tower is only used as backup. DFW Airport has several outlying towers that are used by their tower controllers. Also, we were really fortunate the weather was great that day. Outlying towered airports in the Dallas-Fort Worth area rely on the radar feed from TRACON, and Center could offer traffic coming in to those smaller airports to cancel IFR flight plans and then fly in visually because the weather was good. The feeder airports could keep moving. For the large airports like DFW, they have separate feeds for their radar data, so tower could still see what was going on out there. The next step in a contingency for TRACON failure is to relocate some controllers to nearby Fort Worth Center, but there's some huge problems if it gets to that. Center uses different computers with different keyboards and scopes that display differently. And while there has been a little bit of cross-training, it's not really a good solution. All right, let's talk about the data lines. Back 10 to 15 years ago, that was the last major upgrade to the ATC system, and data was moved from wires that the FAA owned and maintained to fiber optic that they totally contracted out. And while many people might think it's a good idea to separate your primary from your backup secondary, in an effort to save money, the contractor at DFW presumably decided that it was just a good idea to go ahead and just have one trench with both lines running through it. It certainly was a cheaper option than running the secondary cable through a different trench and location. The data that carries the communications and radar is in fiber optic cables owned by Frontier Communications. The FAA contracts L3Harris to oversee the system and its redundancies. When a construction crew severed the two fiber optic cables on Friday, both the primary and secondary data channels were affected. This included all the FAA's radars, radio frequencies, and computer systems. It was a miracle and a testament to the professionals working ATC that all the planes in the airspace at that moment arrived and departed safely with no incidents. I know a lot of controllers at the towers, the TRACON, the center. These men and women are very highly trained. Kudos to them for handling the problems that were thrown at them on Friday. Apparently, who didn't handle the problem thrown at them very well were the people at Frontier and L3Harris. American Airlines, in a letter to their employees, talked about how hard it was to reach leadership at those two companies, that neither company had any sense of urgency. American Airlines was the most affected of the carriers. DFW is their main hub and base. Put in context, between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Friday, they departed only 9 aircraft when it's usually over 300. This rippled throughout their system. The financial impact is going to be enormous. Here's the play-by-play of what went down at that time. At 1:13 p.m. local, ATC Command Center issued a ground stop first tier. And what this means is that any center adjacent to Fort Worth Center was to hold any plane from departing for DFW and Love Field from 1:03 p.m. until 2:15 p.m., listing equipment outage as the reason. Now, one side note, I've talked to several passengers, both east and west, who were told in the first couple of hours that the delay was weather related, when American Airlines knew pretty much right away it was FAA equipment issue. And I'm not really sure why the airline propagated the whole weather story. It makes no sense. At 1:33 p.m., ATC Command Center added to the Tier 1 to include the rest of the U.S. and Canada for the ground stop. At 2:04 p.m., ATC Command Center extended the ground stop to 5 p.m. local. Then at 4:43 p.m., ATC Command Center announced a ground stop until 5 p.m. for American Airlines by carrier request. So while the FAA was moving into its contingency and starting to move planes, American asked the FAA to ground stop all of their planes. Though I'm surprised that the press doesn't cover this important part, it was a good call by American, and let me explain. In normal operations, in the time before the outage, American was moving around 100 planes an hour. When the ground stop happened, they had all these planes full of passengers waiting to take off. And now they needed to go back to a gate. But the gates weren't ready for them or had other planes there. At one point, there were 40 or 50 planes just waiting on the apron there for a gate. It was a total mess, and not Americans' fault, but they needed some time to get things organized and take care of those thousands of passengers sitting on the pavement. Crews were in the wrong places, equipment was not available, passengers were everywhere. And that's why by 6 p.m. local, American had their ground stop extended to 10 p.m. They still needed more time. And had this same story played out in Atlanta, Delta would have had to do the same thing, or United in Chicago. It just happened this was American's home base, and so they were hardest hit. By 10 p.m. that night, the ground stop had been lifted. And though there was an occasional stop here and there the next day or two, things did get back to normal eventually. The recent legislation passed has allocated over $12 billion to the revitalization of the outdated ATC system, and that can't come fast enough. And this event certainly puts a renewed focus on getting this done quickly and safely. And I hope with the bureaucracy, they make some better decisions on running backup lines with the primary lines. In the meantime, my crew finally made it back home the next day, as did my relatives. It took some time, but American Airlines was able to untangle the mess at a huge and yet to be determined cost. And hopefully, there are some lessons learned that can be implemented when the time comes for the new upgrades. So turning our focus to Europe, it wasn't cut cables, but instead an attack on the Collins Aerospace Muse software that automates the check-in. Over the weekend of September 20th, hackers knocked out the software, which affected the largest airports in Europe, including Brussels, Berlin, and London Heathrow. Brussels was hardest hit, with half of their flights canceled through Monday, September 22nd. The attack was first detected on Friday, September 19th, spilling into Saturday the 20th. The Muse software runs electronic check-in, baggage management, and enables the airlines to have more automation with all that, with the check-in process, which reduces labor and complexity. Airline employees had to locate pen and paper and create handwritten boarding passes. Many flights delayed or canceled, and the travelers were all left scrambling. The European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA, is investigating, but no official statement has been made as to what group or country is behind the attack. But Poland says that they log between 20 to 50 Russian-linked cyber attacks every day. There's no word if the attacks are part of this year's earlier hacks of the aviation industry by the cyber criminal group Scattered Spider, who have been linked to attacks on Hawaiian Airlines, Qantas, and others. Collins Aerospace has claimed that they're in the final stages of pushing fixes. As airports around Europe scramble with backup system, there's no timeline yet as to when they'll be back to fully functioning. If you're out there traveling, be careful, get to the airport early, and be flexible. That's our report today, and I want to thank our sponsors like Flying Eyes Optics, the best glasses under headsets and helmets, and you get 10% off your order if you go to flyingeyesoptics.com/takingoff10. I love my Flying Eyes. I'm wearing the prescription glasses that come with the mag clips for the sunglasses. They have all sorts there on the website. Check them out. And also 67 Designs. I use their phone camera mounts in my plane. They're made in America and they're built to last. 67D.com. And also check out our recent report by clicking right here. Thanks again for watching. And remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.